Hey, this is Mazzy, and this is the British invasion. And I brought together a handful of some of my vinyl community friends who all live in the UK, although Ryan lives in Wales. I guess that counts. I hate to pick on Wales. I actually have been through Wales. But what I wanted to do here, I wanted to bring together a group of I consider you all friends now, and that I've watched your videos. We've kind of grew in the vinyl community on YouTube together over the last several years, and talk about what albums represent Britain and the UK to them. Now, I'm coming from the American point of view, obviously, and I want to just do a little intro from 1964 and the British invasion. This is not purely a British invasion video, but that's how I got into it. I tend to be a bit of a Anglophile amateur, and coming on this video, I was really excited to do this and a little disappointed that I'm the only one that apparently learned something from Savile Row in terms of, dressing up here. Everybody's just dresses down in the UK now, apparently. We did invite a handful of other people that either couldn't make it in this time, or didn't respond, or we didn't have connections to. So there's several of you out there that I wish we could have collaborated on this, and maybe next time we'll do another variation of this. But I love England. I've been to England I think I've been to England 7 or 8 times since 1978, my first trip there. But what I want to do is I'm going to just start off, and then we'll go around the block. Everyone will introduce themselves, where they live, where they're from, and their musical choices, and we'll discuss them. As I do usually cheat, I'm not having 3 records, but I'm doing a pile just in terms of 1964 to begin with. And I'm not going to talk about the records, but of course, you can't talk about the British invasion without talking about the Beatles. February 9th, 1964, them on the Ed Sullivan Show. They arrived Pan Am Flight 101 on the 7th of February, and everything changed. And just from my perspective, we all know that in America, Capitol Records would put out 3 records for every 2 records the Beatles actually made, taking tracks off of the 14 track, making 12 tracks, taking singles, and so on. And in the first year, that 1 year in 1964, and only the Capitol ones, I'm not going to talk about the sub labels, but you got Meet the Beatles, Beatles' second album, the early Beatles, Hard Day's Night with the score songs, something new, which has Capitol getting some of the rights to Hard Day's Night songs and others, Beatles 65, that actually came out holiday 64, closest, I think, to Beatles for sale. Of course, that same year, for the tail end of the year, we got the Kinks, who would get banned from the US because of them beating up the unions, and the unions banned them for 4 years, which would be a good part of the story, why the Kinks, out of all the British bands, really wrote about Britain and London, because they didn't tour like the Stones and all the other bands. Also, Peter and Gordon, part of the, doing Lennon McCartney covers, having big hits. The Animals, House of the Rising Sun. Of course, the Dave Clark Five were actually the second big band out right after the Beatles that on the Ed Sullivan. They're the big band that, in a way, historically, I think imploded because of the wankiness of Dave Clark. And lastly, I can't talk about the British invasion, and she's not really spoken a lot about in the British invasion without mentioning the great Dusty Springfield. And of course, this album came out a couple months, I think, after the original British album. This is what we had in America with the hits. And this is with Stay a While and I Only Want to Be With You. I love this song, Wishing and Hoping, and love that. And then lastly, from my point of view, a big record for me in terms of Britain was 1978. I think it was March or April. I arrived at Heathrow, my very first time to England. My friend picked me up at the airport, and he turns on the radio. First song I hear is Wuthering Heights by Kate Bush. To steal from you guys, I was gobsmacked. Like, what the fuck was that voice? What the fuck is that song? That soaring guitar at the end. It seemed to go on forever. and I fell in love with it. Next day, I took the tube down to Oxford Street, and I believe it was either the HMV or the Virgin Megastore at Marble Arch, and I bought this exact single in 1978, and I fell in love with Kate Bush. So that's my introduction, and those are my choices. And I really want to go around here, and we're going to start with Headley Brown. He's going to share the name of his channel, and we'll take it from there. Anyway, thanks, fellas, for joining me.
Oh, thanks, Massey. I'm Headley. I'm another fat bearded man talking about records. Like and subscribe.
There'll be links below to everyone here, by the way.
Yeah. Anyway, so yeah, thanks, Massey, for putting this together. It's a great idea. I initially was trying to think about your specific invasion, but I didn't realize. I had to reread your message and went, right. What do I think about is quintessentially British? Well, I'm going to show 3 records here. First 2 I'm going to just scoot over, and the obvious one for me is to go folk. This is the Copper Family from Rottingdean in Sussex, and this is a cappella singing. And in some ways you could go, this is sort of what folk music and the music of Britain was 100, 200 years ago. And that's quite an obvious choice, really, to do something like that. The other one I thought about doing or showing was some Elgar, the Enigma Variations that's on this. And I think, that is probably the most jingoistically British type of music you could probably get. There's a radio show on the BBC called Desert Island Discs, where they interview famous people and they choose 8 or 9 tunes, that they like. And Elgar's, this is classical music, by the way, just in case anyone didn't know. The most people have chosen over the years, it started in 1940, I believe, and more people have chosen as a British artist, Elgar. I think Mozart and Beethoven and Bach do better, but a homegrown talent, Elgar. But like I said, that's the sort of conservative Tory choice I thought I'd go for. But as I'm, one of the proletariat, well, not really, but I thought I'd have to go with Chas and Dave.
I was waiting for that.
You knew it was coming, didn't you, John?
I have no idea who you're talking about.
Right, there you go. Right, Chas and Dave
are.
No, and this is right. Okay, so first of all, the reason I chose this
is this like Penn and Derek? This isn't like Penn and Derek, is it?
No.
Okay.
So, but the first reason I chose this is because it's Chas and Dave. The second reason is because it's fucking Chas and Dave. It's, you don't need any more reason than that. Anyway, so Chas and Dave are basically 2. Chas Hodges, Dave Peacock, and Mickey Burt on drums. And they produce a kind of what they call rockney, which is a mixture of rock and roll with Cockney music.
Of course it is.
And they are quintessential. I mean, one of the reasons I think that I wanted to choose this is, unlike the Beatles, they failed to break America. And I think that's why.
Did they even try?
They did, yeah. There was a release. There was a CD released in the mid 80s or early 90s when they were having a bit of a revival.
Were they Michael Caine's favorite band? It seems like
probably.
No.
But this album is called Don't Give a Monkeys, and that's Don't Give a Monkey's uncle. And so it's they use a lot of Cockney rhyming slang. Although they were from Edmonton, which isn't technically a Cockney area, but in London. And they do working class subject matter. So you have songs on here like songs about hangovers, songs about a miserable Saturday night when all your mates are down the pub, things like that. It's very British. Working class subject matter. It's got a foot in the music hall. So some of their other records, they do old music hall songs from the sort of 100 years prior. And also one of the things I think that I would always disagree, but people always say that this has got 2 tracks on it called Gertrude and Rabbit, and they were 2 big hits. And you could accuse them of being novelty songs, I think. I don't think they are, but they could be accused of being novelty songs. And I think Britain, more than America, has novelty songs. And I think the BBC is probably the reason for this, because you get a DJ on BBC that plays something, and suddenly we're all buying Mr. Blobby singles or Bob the Builder singles and getting to #1.
We used to have a lot more in the 60s and 70s, and then it kind of faded. All those Flying Saucer records, about those, and
things like the Monster Mash and things like that as well.
Well, that too, and Itsy Bitsy Teeny Weeny Yellow Polka Dot Bikini.
Yeah, even respectable artists like David Bowie doing the Laughing Gnome and nonsense like that. It was like if you were strapped for cash, come up with one of those kind of cheesy kind of one that the kids will like.
But to be fair, Bowie wasn't respectable at the time, was he? He was just desperate for any sort of hit. So
he was
just trying to find hit with a novelty song.
Is Wonderful Christmas Time considered a novelty?
I think if it's Christmas song, it's novelty. It's clearly
okay.
It's got to be.
But that's an interesting thing. In America, artists will do whole Christmas albums, but here an artist will just do one single. I think that's a big difference. And also in America, it's not deemed as weird or odd.
I think it is.
Do you think it is?
Well, no, but I there's I probably have a handful of oddball, weird, kind of quirky singles the one I know Christmas is a whole different category, but I think I wanted to punch people out because I worked in record stores the day when Grandma Got Run Over by a Reindeer came out, Patsy and Elmo. And there are Christmas songs and there are Christmas songs. And Wonderful Christmas Time compared to that is like written by Albert Einstein, I think. So.
But so it's got that novelty stuff. They draw one of the things that Britain's quite good at is the Beatles were selling back rock and roll. We're very good at taking stuff as well and melding it in our own kind of way. Obviously the Beatles did that and the Rolling Stones, but Chas and Dave are doing that because they're taking earlier 50s rock and roll and melding it with that music hall. And I thought you'd like this, Mazzy. This is actually it's the first half of this album is studio cuts. The second half is live, and it was recorded in Studio One at Abbey Road. What's
so
more?
There's a Beatle connection.
Clearly. Apparently they did it over 2 nights.
I thought you were going to say Ry Cooder was on the live segment.
No, they did it in Abbey Road, and they set up a bar. There were 2 bars in the studio, so the invited audience could go and have a pint whilst listening to Chas and Dave. So Chas and Dave.
I thought you were going to say it was recorded live in a pub in the Old Kent Road or something.
Muswell Hill.
I think you're doing them as like disjustice in a way. Disjustice, is that the right word? Anyway, injustice. I kind of see them like folk music. It's just folks that don't live in the countryside and plough fields. Folks that live in the city and go down the pub, and you know what I mean. I think there's a real kind of heritage of kind of bar songs and sitting around the piano in pubs and singing, which is probably has roots in Ireland and all over the place in a way. I don't see them as purely. I know they had their kind of light-hearted side, but I've got a strange fondness for them. Oh
no, don't get me wrong, David. I'm a huge fan of Chas and Dave. I've got practically everything they've done, and I think their sort of mega mix albums that they churned out are a little bit difficult for a newcomer. But some of their stuff is, I think songs like Rabbit and Gertrude, I think are brilliant songs. I mean, actually, some of their earlier stuff wouldn't sound out of place on alongside someone like Ian Dury, or maybe the Kinks. They're doing that same thing. They're talking about the people down the pub. They're talking about the person who lives down the street. That's that sort of thing.
Yeah, and that's exactly what I was talking about when I was talking about the Kinks and not being able to tour America, where Ray just kept writing about British life, even beyond, even when they started touring, like a soap opera about Norman and, you know, this ordinary guy. They had to use the name Norman, but
You see, the thing,
So-
Mazzy, sorry, Mazzy, you don't know who Chaz and Dave are, but you'll know a lot of records that Chaz Hodges played on, because Chaz was a shit hot session musician. So go on, Headley, real smart for us, will you?
Yeah, the Outlaws, obviously produced by Joe Meek
Okay.
in the early 60s. Heads, Hands and Feet.
Oh yeah.
He was in fact, it was playing with them which kind of gave him the idea of, he felt really bad when he was in America putting on American accent to sing sort of country songs. So he decided he wanted to use his own accent, and that was one of the things. But yeah,
I bet you, was he on Barefoot Jerry's album too? Remember
don't
Barefoot
think
Jerry?
so. No.
But you know Barefoot Jerry, right? That's
Yeah,
like
yeah.
They're
Yeah,
a
it's all,
Headley band.
yeah, Charlie
They're
McCoy and
definitely-
people like that, all the session
Yeah.
players. Yeah.
Yeah.
From my point of view as a soul fan, Chaz Hodges, he played on I Got There, which is a track by Labi Siffre, which was sampled in the late 90s by Eminem on the track My Name Is. So that bass line, da-na-na, da-na-na, that's Chaz and Dave basically.
Oh wow.
So
Okay.
there you go.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you, Headley. We'll phone you.
Thank you.
Let's move on to Roswell Ryan, direct from Wales.
Okay, well, so
Take a big
Oh,
glug of
okay.
wine first. That's the way to do it.
I picked 3 records. So
Good.
basically,
That was
I
the
mean,
instructions. You read the instructions. I'm
well,
glad that people in
as we're
Wales
sort
can
of
read the
not
instructions.
sort of like focusing on one specifically, I'll just sort of talk about them sort of, well, we'll see how we go anyway. So I don't know. First off, you know, I thought I'd pick Robert Wyatt's Rock Bottom. I hadn't listened to this for a couple of well, probably at least a year, and I threw it on the turntable the other night, and I was surprised sort of how like how I could sort of remember every single sort of lyric sort of off by heart when I threw it on the turntable. And to be fair, this has some absolutely fantastic musicians from the Canterbury scene on this, including one of my favorite bass players, which is Richard Sinclair, who plays in the band Caravan. And obviously this is produced by Nick Mason of Floyd, and was recorded not long after Robert's accident. I just think this is a very sweet and very memorable album, especially the lyrical content, you know, between it's a very personal album between him and his wife, Alfie. It's a very sweet album, and I think it's so memorable. And I don't have a lot of Robert Wyatt's discography. I have a lot of Soft Machine, but I think this is a really, really fantastic listen. And to be fair, I was surprised that I've had this for a couple of years, and I'm very surprised I do not listen to this more often. It's such a rewarding listen, and I was initially going to pick a Soft Machine album. I was probably going to pick third. I mean, although I love the debut and I absolutely love Volume 2. That's one of my favorites. But I thought, because I listened to this recently, like I said, it's fantastic, and I just thought that it's got a great contributions from Ivor Cutlass, and great spoken word on this, and it's fantastic, and it's sort of a whirlwind of emotions, this album. Well, very, very good, and I thought this was a fantastic pick.
He has big cult status in America, but never like he is in England. And he's someone that obviously I was someone that would every month would get Q and Mojo for years and years, and he was like the darling of the music press as he aged. And so I got into some of his later CDs because I'd never had any of his early stuff.
Yeah. See, I really need to get more of his solo albums. See, I'm sort of on the lookout for a nice copy of his album. Is it called Old Rotten Hat or something like that? Because Alan Static Traveler had mentioned that it was a fantastic album to pick up. So I'm on the lookout for that. But like I said, I was going to pick a Soft Machine album initially, and it was going to be third, but I thought I'd pick that instead. So the next pick I had from for this was well.
Oh yeah.
One such.
Right, yeah.
So I love most of XTC stuff. Don't get me wrong, and this is later on in their discography. I think this is like 1992 or something.
Yeah, I love that record.
Not long before they broke away from their contract with Virgin. Dave Gregory's still in the band. I mean, obviously, I can't remember the name of the original drummer, but this is a fantastic album. And to be fair, with XTC, the thing is, they're probably, since I discovered their music, it was a few years ago, as soon as I heard a couple of their hit singles, like, Making Plans for Nigel, Mayor is Simpleton, some of the early stuff, like This Is Pop and everything. The documentary they did recently was absolutely fantastic. I absolutely love XTC, and I know a lot of people don't. This album seems to be in like sort of a camp, sort of like certain people like this period of XTC, certain people don't. I think this is kind of a perfect album for them, to be fair. Every single song is absolutely fantastic. I mean, to be fair, some of my favorite songs on this would be My Bird Performs, which is one of Colin Moulding's songs. And I will say, obviously, Andy Partridge and Colin Moulding are the main songwriters in the band, of course, but I like both their songwriting styles and playing completely equally. Colin Moulding is one of my favorite bass players, hands down. Very technically efficient, but extremely tasteful as well. And Andy Partridge's sort of influences, because he likes a lot of sort of avant-garde stuff. I know he's a massive fan of Captain Beefheart, and his playing, I think he's a very, very underrated guitar player, as is Colin Moulding, a bass player. They are both amazing. And also, I think a standout moment on this album in particular, everything's amazing, but I'm sure it's a performance on David Letterman that you can find on YouTube, that they performed the song off this Books Are Burning when this came out. Obviously, everybody knows that Andy had a nervous breakdown around the time of English Settlement, and they never performed live again. But they did do TV appearances occasionally, and they did do one on David Letterman, I'm sure, of Books Are Burning. And check it out, Andy's guitar solo at the end of that is, I mean, I know everybody knows that Dave Gregory, everybody thought that Dave Gregory was sort of the guitar genius behind this band. But, I mean, I think that Andy Partridge is extremely underrated, and that video of his solo at the end of the last song on this album, Books Are Burning, on the David Letterman show, is just amazing.
It's funny because their catalogue is quite diverse, really, isn't it? I really like the first couple of albums, which are very quite straight ahead punk records, bit more or new wave records.
Like the first
3-minute pop songs, which are to the point, very catchy, brilliant songs. But those later albums, they, I suppose, a little bit like Talk, they went off on a tangent. They're making music which is totally their own, totally unique.
And they're one of those bands that, in a way, they're the bands that got away from major success, which what we were talking about earlier. In a way, they're one of my favorite bands, and that's kind of what I like about them, that they weren't huge like U2 and those bands, although they're beyond cult status too. So they're in that kind of weird void that people know about them and that when they hear the music, but I don't think they've ever made a bad album. They never made a bad album.
No, exactly. Did you see the documentary that they did?
I did.
Wasn't it fantastic?
Yes. It makes me want to go to. It makes me want to go to Swindon.
Yeah.
No, nothing makes
No,
me go to sleep.
no.
That's kind of like
I hope
last
Psyche the Ballet's
during
not watching. I hope Steve's not watching.
a year ago during lockdown. My friend, the archivist, and I, we had 115-degree day, 2 or 3 days in Seattle, which is never happens. Nobody has air conditioning here. We had to get out, so we went to the coast and we went to Aberdeen. Aberdeen, if you know Nirvana and Kurt Cobain, and it's basically the shithole of the Pacific Northwest. Probably, you don't want to go there, even though there's a statue of Kurt Cobain by the lake, by a swamp, not even a lake.
What a swamp, yeah. That says it all.
What he would have
doesn't
wanted.
Sorry, Kurt.
it? Yeah.
But so the last one I picked is it's an album by a band called Death in June. But realistically, I could have picked. The reason I'm picking this is because I could have picked sort of any sort of band from this sort of scene that sort of came to prominence during the sort of late 70s, early 80s. You could say, like Throbbing Gristle, Psychic TV, Current 93, Coil, Nurse with Wound, that kind of scene. All these kind of bands came to prominence around the same sort of time, but I guess I'll talk about Death in June just because they're probably my favorite out of the bunch. But they kind of started off as sort of I guess Death in June sort of arose out of the ashes of a punk band called Crisis, which were around in the late 70s. And 3 chaps called Douglas P., Patrick Legas, and Tony Wakeford formed a band called Death in June, who released probably 3 albums with the original lineup, but then Death in June sort of subsequently became the sole project of the main member, Douglas P. So it's basically, in the early years, it was kind of slightly a kind of like akin to sort of like a Joy Division sort of post-punk sound, but blended with English, sort of Irish and Scottish, like for some offshoots of folk music. So it's basically, I guess you could say, folk music combined with industrial elements and sort of samples and various things. But I think it was a good pick for me because all these bands sort of were interrelated with each other and friends with each other and came to prominence in the UK at sort of the same time.
What period is that? Is that like 80s?
It would have been, very late 70s, early 80s. So this was the 3rd Death in June album, and it's.
I don't know how. I don't know. I've never heard of them. That's interesting.
Yeah. So I thought I'd talk about this because this is some music that I've been quite obsessed with recently, and like I was saying, a lot of the people in this circle would collaborate with each other. So if you've heard of bands like Coil or Current 93 or Nurse with Wound, I know Stunty talks about Coil and Nurse with Wound a lot. These chaps are all friends in the same sort of era. A lot of them also are still working today as well. So I think this music is definitely worth checking out. It's not everyone's cup of tea, but it's music that I love, and because it's all these bands are quintessentially British, I thought it would be a good pick. And this is sort of an album that sort of blends the sort of industrial side and the sort of dark sort of folk music together while the sort of Death in June was still in the early formation, and they were kind of still a band before it became the solo project.
I don't know too much about them. Just what I've heard, it's incredibly intense, isn't it? It's incredibly intense industrial music.
With Death in June early on, yes. But
Right.
as they progressed, it's literally just folk music.
Oh right.
Acoustic guitar, vocals,
Right.
percussion, and that's it. It's folk music.
That reminds
really.
me, currently I've been listening to this woman who's in Oregon, goes by the name of Grouper. And Grouper started out doing a lot of ambient and sort of industrial, I want to say noise somewhat, but it's grounded in folk, and there's a lot of acoustic things, and she's morphed more into the acoustic folk thing, but uses a lot of effects, and pretty much a
Yes.
one-woman show. Yeah.
Yes, that kind of sounds like what this is. Yes,
Mm-hmm.
later on. Yeah.
Ryan, do you think,
Okay.
you say it's sort of very late 70s and into the 80s. I mean, do you think there's the music they're creating a sort of reaction to sort of Thatcherite Britain?
Yes. That. Yeah. That's it.
As in the same way, I suppose, that things like the specials and things like that, but
Yeah.
just using that as a different way to sort of express themselves.
Yeah.
Yes, yeah, they have a lot of sort of risque sort of imagery going on, but it's nothing sinister or anything like that. But yeah, as Headley says, yeah,
But possibly more successful than Roger Waters reacting to Maggie, right?
Yeah, but although I will
Final
say
Cut.
that,
I'm talking about Final Cut, an album I dislike. But
I absolutely love Roger Waters, and one of my favorite two albums ever, his solo albums, Amused to Death and The Pros and Cons of Hitchhiking. So I absolutely love Roger Waters. Yeah, big fan.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, John, let's move on to John.
Okay. So my choice is, I think the word that you can use to describe them is lightweight, because which tends to be my. Oh yeah, sorry Headley. Yeah, sorry. No, actually no. To start off with, so I wanted to pick a British reggae record. So I love British reggae. I love the fact that it's got its own sound. It's like what Headley was saying earlier on about us taking something from, say in this case, Jamaica, and then making it our own. I know a lot of people would cite an album like Handsworth Revolution by Steel Pulse as being the greatest British reggae album of all time, but I've got to give it to Signing Off by UB40. Now, I live in Birmingham. This album was made about 3 miles from where I live at the moment. It's made in a bedsit in Moseley. And this is their debut album. They were just kids. They were teenagers when this came out. And, the first thing is it was recorded in a bedsit. It sounds absolutely fantastic. The production on this is great. If you don't know the song King, which was a top 10 hit over here, listen to it. The production is just absolutely exquisite. It's a wonderful sounding record, but it's a political record. So, and obviously Headley just alluded there to a lot of music from this sort of period, late 70s, early 80s. This was recorded in 1980, having obviously reference to Margaret Thatcher. The songs on here, obviously, that follow that theme. The album cover itself and the name of the band. The album cover is basically the benefits, the unemployment benefits form. But what I like about it, it's called Signing Off because it's basically alluding to something more positive, stepping away from relying on benefits, etc. And but the songs, for example, talking about politics, the track for me on here is a track called Burden of Shame, which talks about, the misdeeds performed in the name of British imperialism, and considering, this was a band of teenagers, a mixture of black and white musicians singing about subject matter like that, and with, such power. It's an incredibly powerful song. I find it absolutely extraordinary. And I suppose that's the case with pop music as a whole throughout the ages, isn't it? That some of the most powerful pop music about social issues, around political issues, has been made by teenagers, incredibly young songwriters, and that's a perfect example of that. So yeah, a brilliant album. If you haven't heard it, check it out. And I suppose in that same breath, really, I could also mention the Specials debut album. Headley mentioned it as well. It's the same principle again, not necessarily taking reggae in this instance, but taking ska music and making it to something new. So obviously ska music, that's traditional 60s ska sound, very much relied on the horn sound front and center. The Specials changed that. They put the guitars front and center, so it gave a bit more of a punk edge. But again, it's make it into something new. But the album that I'm going to talk about is this. Right. So I appreciate I could be, ridiculed for this album, but as we all know, ridicule is nothing to be scared of. Headley, don't shake
Not at all.
don't shake your head, Headley. So this is Adam and the Ants and their second album, Kings of the Wire Frontier, recorded in 1980, came out in 1981. Now, I've said before, I had a discussion with Headley on his channel, and we're talking about British music, British indie music, and my point was that I think that 1980 is the best year for the British single chart, because it was just so eclectic. You had heavy metal, you had punk, you had new wave, you had the arse and the disco in there as well, pop music, you had novelty songs. And in 1981, as this recorded in 80, it came out in November 1980. This was the biggest selling album of 1981, and I just think this shows how sort of eccentric British music can be. Now, Adam and the Ants put out an album in 1978, 79 called Dirt Wears White Socks. Now, this album, it's got that Adam and the Ants sound, but it's far more serious, and it did okay. It's more of a punk album. It doesn't have the humor that this album has. It doesn't have the pantomime. It's incredibly camp, this record is. And apparently the story goes that Adam went to Malcolm McLaren and said, Malcolm, what do I need to do to get a hit record? And Malcolm McLaren said, if you give me £1,000, I'll tell you. So Adam went away and he got £1,000. Now, obviously, in 1978, £1,000, I mean, it's a lot of money today, but in 1978, that's a considerable amount of money. So he gave Malcolm McLaren £1,000, said, okay, Malcolm, what's the secret? How do I get a hit record? And Malcolm McLaren said, okay, Burundi drumming. Now, if I'd have been Adam, I'd have said, I want my money back, right? But no, Adam goes away and cuts an album which is all based around Burundi drumming, right? So if you ever hear these songs on the radio now, they still sound strange. Songs like Dog Eat Dog, Kings of the Wire Frontier, Ant Music. These were all top 5 singles in the UK in 1980, 81. And, you hear them on the radio today, they still sound weird. They don't sound quite right. But, people talk about David Bowie and that Top of the Pops performance for Starman, when he comes out, he's got his red hair, he's playing that blue acoustic guitar, he's got his arm around Mick Ronson, singing together at the microphone. People talk about that being a life-changing moment. Well, for me as a kid, seeing Adam and the Ants performing Ant Music on Top of the Pops, I can honestly say that changed my life, because that song, from that moment on, that's what I wanted. I wanted pop music. And that's basically what it was. So that's what influenced me. But what I was going to say, okay, so the band, Adam, he looks fantastic, so he's got the whole dandy highwayman garb going on. The whole band are dressed up like that. But there's always one member of the band that doesn't quite look comfortable with it all, doesn't quite look right. And in this case, it's Marco, the guitarist.
It's Marco. He's the one that looks out of place.
He does. He's got the makeup on, he's got the togs, whatever. But he's a bit of a bigger guy. It doesn't quite sit right with him. Whereas, Adam was beautiful in his day. He really was a great-looking guy. But at the end of the day, Marco wrote the songs. It's a little bit like bit like Glenn Matlock in the Sex Pistols. He didn't quite fit in. He's a little bit more rock and roll than punk, wasn't he? But he wrote the songs. And that's the case with Marco. He wrote all those great songs, and he was the difference between what Adam and the Ants were beforehand with Dirt Wears White Socks, which is the punk band. In 1980, they made the biggest selling album of the year with Burundi drumming, because they had great melodies from Marco Peroni. So there you go.
Was he the sole composer on those albums?
No, he wrote them. He wrote the songs with Adam. So Adam did write the songs, because that's where,
as we all know now, publishing, and that's where Adam could be broke and this guy could be rich.
No, that's right. But he so basically they made one more album after that. Prince Charming, and then Adam went solo. He got rid of the Ants, but he kept Marco. He kept Marco on board because he was the guy that wrote the songs.
Can I ask a question? Did Bow Wow Wow have to pay £1,000 too to Malcolm?
Well, no. That was a case of Malcolm McLaren just nicking the original Ants. So basically, they made the first album, and then Malcolm McLaren nicked Adam's band. He charged him £1,000 for Burundi drumming, and he nicked his band. put a girl singer up front, Annabelle, can't think of her name, and obviously, so then he did the whole Bruddy drumming thing with Barrow Wow. But yeah, brilliant.
I think one of the things you mentioned, John, there that I think is very important is Top of the Pops for that sort of pop music through the 70s into the 80s. Was it Thursday night? It was 7 o'clock Thursday night. That was what you listened to, unless you were listening to the chart rundown on Sunday evening and taping it, And so,
right, and
it was and I think that, I always get the idea that America, very rarely do you get this idea that there's that coast to coast thing. There's that idea that the whole nation is doing the same thing at the same time, because you've all got that the time zones, and
Right.
whereas in the UK, that at 7 o'clock on Thursday night, everybody is sat down watching Top of the Pops. Well, not everybody, and you are watching at exactly the same time. Adam Ant coming out and and it's a communal experience, I think.
But you
I always get the idea that maybe America doesn't quite have.
Families watched it together. So, I was a kid. I was 5 or 6 years old when that album came out. Got an older sister, 9 years older than me. She'd be watching it as well. My mum and dad would be watching it. So my dad would be sitting there and saying, look at the state of him. What's he come as? Type thing, And then you've got, but then he's happy when I don't know what do they call pans people come out or something like that. Something for the dads.
Yes, pans people were a troupe of dancing girls that when they couldn't get the band to come, or there wasn't a video, they would do an interpretive dance to the song.
Headley, you said something that's
the older you've got, the more embarrassing they were, the band's people.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Headley said something that I just, for some reason, after almost 60 years, 58 years, it just never occurred to me that, obviously I know we have 3 time zones in the States, is that Ed Sullivan of 71 million people watching that, we weren't all watching it at the same time. And I just, they always say the biggest audience at one, obviously it's segmented and I saw a delay, but we didn't even know about delays because there was no satellite TV and things like that. But everybody watched that. And in terms of Top of the Pops, we knew about that later on. We had some feeds of that, but we had American Bandstand with Dick Clark every Saturday, and that was our thing. And of course, later in the 60s in the afternoon, we had the show he did with Paul Irvin and the Raiders on it, where the action is, and all these kind of bands were on that. But Dick Clark was the guy bringing us that. Then later, of course, Don Cornelius and Soul Train, which know probably more about that whole thing. But I never thought that I was 9.5 years old when the Ed Sullivan thing happened, but I never thought about the whole country, because we think about it. America watched the Beatles 3 months after Kennedy was killed. America, 2 months, watched the Beatles. Everyone, the biggest audience ever at the time, to that point. So,
yeah.
Okay.
I also have a kind of strong memory. Sorry, just to Top of the Pops. But when bands started to take the piss out of it, suddenly they were kind of like. They didn't quite respect it, or the record company had told them to go on there, but they were going to try and subvert a bit. Some people wouldn't go on. I remember the Boomtown Rats coming on, and there was a saxophone solo, and somebody kind of mimed playing it on a candelabra. So it was like completely, not even trying to persuade you that they were playing live. It was all like the good guitars clearly weren't plugged in. Sometimes they would just take the guitar off mid-song. Some of those new wave bands were just like really bucking the trend and kind of thinking, we don't really like being here. It felt good at the time because
there's that farcical process, wasn't there? Because they weren't allowed to play the original record because of the unions. So in effect, you might have, for example, Queen's Bohemian Rhapsody, which had taken months to make, and with all these layered vocals. And basically, the BBC would book the band a 3-hour session on the morning of Top of the Pops. So the idea is you've got to turn up and re-record your song for in 3 hours, and that's in theory is the song that should be played on the on the show on the night. But of course, it never was. It was always the original version. But the fact that as these songs got more and more complicated, You know, you've got to go and recreate that. Songs that have taken months to make, you've got to recreate it in just a few hours. Just became farcical, you know. Brilliant.
You know, in an archaeological way, we're so thankful for that now, to have these BBC recordings, the Beatles at the Beeb, Led Zeppelin, Bowie, you know, all Mark Bolan. It's really wonderful to have those recordings. And we had that on I think it was Dick Clark. You couldn't play live too. You had to mime it. And some bands, there's a famous J.J. Cale, you know, never got famous. Would he have gotten famous? They basically walked out because he wouldn't. They were there to play live, and they had to mime it. And I'm sure there are countless other artists like that just didn't want it.
But that's the thing, you know, just how important these shows were. You know, if a band got a Top of the Pops performance, they were pretty much guaranteed to sell more records the following week. So your song would go up the charts, you know. So that's a difference of you talked about, right. Mentioned Bowie early on, you know. Bowie was on Top of the Pops. He did Starman, and that was really something that just changed. I say it changed a lot of lives, but also that changed his career. You know, that really did change things for him. People went out and bought his record, and it became this more than just a cult artist. And he became a big national artist at that point. You know, so yeah.
Starman was my first song I ever heard of Bowie, and I bought that Ziggy Stardust, and then bought tickets because he was coming to Winterland in San Francisco that holds 5,000 people, and 500 people showed up to see David Bowie. Of course, 3 nights later, he plays the Santa Monica show from the live. You know, they made the live album, and it sells out. Like San Francisco just wasn't hip that early in '72, I guess, to Bowie until that next tour. So
you get that thing with Bowie. Obviously, now everybody looks back with rose-tinted glasses. He could do no wrong. But you know, the first time that I saw him at the NEC in Birmingham, and I didn't buy tickets. You had to save up so many Twix wrappers, you know, chocolate bars. You know, you had to save up like 5 chocolate bar wrappers, and you could go and see David Bowie, right? And we went there, so we saved up these 5 wrappers. We got the tickets. Brilliant, we're going to go see David Bowie. We got there. The place was half empty. People couldn't be asked to save up 5 chocolate wrappers to go and see David Bowie. Nobody wanted to see him, you know. That's a different time.
Yeah.
Amazing.
All right, Mr. David Ellis. Now, where are you now, David? David? Hello?
I'm having a problem now. This is perfect timing.
We'll get him. We'll get him there. We see you. We can hear you, David. Can you hear us? Dum da dum da dum. Let's have that Penge and Derek. I have you right here.
Your guest appearance from Penge and Derek.
We can kind of wait till
on the back of that conversation about Top of the Pops. I think the fact that we do have the BBC has allowed the music to be far more diverse, and bands that perhaps would never have got airtime if they were, you know, trying to make money off it, or that you know, it kind of brings this sort of eclecticness. Thank God for the BBC.
No, definitely, I agree.
Ray Cooder's fantastic performances in the 70s on the old grey whistle test.
Grey whistle
test.
Yeah,
you're right.
Fantastic. Some of the best.
My favorite Ray Cooder version of Dark End of the Streets on that.
I know, it's just absolutely.
Yep.
Fantastic.
Okay, David, let's go with David now.
Okay, hi. Okay, well, interestingly, first one I was going to show was special.
There you go. What are the chances, David?
Well, and I suppose for me, this 12-inch single of Ghost Town was the kind of epitome of that, really, because it seemed to come along just at a time when everything was getting really political in music. And so, I mean, on the back of perhaps Enoch Powell, like way before that, talking about the whole what he called as a problem of immigration, to like Thatcher's Britain, UB40 talking about I am 1 in 10, which was basically that 10% of the population were unemployed. There were a whole bunch of kind of right-wing people like the National Front who seem to be blaming immigration for all the UK's woes. And then,
hasn't changed over here.
Yeah, exactly. And then right about that time, you know, this whole two-tone thing started. And I mean, the whole thing was kind of black and white. It's integration. You know, there were bands with black members and white members in the same band. And UB40 as well, and taking kind of ska music, because they'd all grown up in Coventry, listening to the ska music that came over in the 50s and 60s, and kind of fusing that with kind of punk and post-punk, and forming a kind of English version of ska music. And that really feels like something that's very British, that idea of, it's always been a place where people have come from all over the world to visit, and influences. I mean, if you just look at food in most of our cities, you know, you can go around the corner and you can get Indian or Thai or Afghanistan food, or you can get American burgers, or I can get some Russian borscht, or you can get, you know, lots of Europe, you don't get that. They've got really big food cultures. So if you go to Italy, you'll just get Italian food. If you go to France, you'll get French food pretty much. But England has often been a kind of hub. And I think that particular time in the kind of late 70s, early 80s, with the two-tone thing, and just the whole real politicization of music, this kind of gave a real voice that was kind of against that whole kind of right-wing thing, and felt very important to me as a youngster buying music, that there was a lot more to it than just kind of fashion and music sensibility in a way. So yeah, that was my first point of call. My second one, somebody that has been mentioned, would be Ian Dury, really. And this is a lot to do with the style of music and also the kind of lyrical content. So the kind of style of music is very much born out of kind of English pubs and English music hall, which I think you would probably call kind of vaudeville in America, but a kind of light-hearted kind of musical theatre kind of thing that was also fused with kind of new wave music coming through. And I mean, he used to be in a band called Kilburn and the High Roads, which is about as London as you can get. Kilburn High Road, somewhere I used to go to quite regularly. So he was kind of from the East End of London and frequented the kind of areas around Essex. So some of his songs, you know, there's Billericay Dicky, and lots of kind of rhyming slang things in his records. What a Waste has things, references to having a career in music being what a waste. And he says, I could have been various things. And one of the things he says, I could have been a ticket man at Fulham Broadway station. And in Reasons to be Cheerful, he talks about various things like Hammersmith Palais, which was a great venue, which is sadly no longer open, and like NHS spectacles, and I wrote some other things down that were in that. Oh yeah, cheddar cheese and pickle, and Vincent motorcycles. And can you still hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you, David. Yeah.
I don't know what's happened here. It's asking me for a Wi-Fi
You decided to go to the
password.
beach. You decided to go to the beach
Yeah,
here.
well, I'm in this strange little hut near the beach, and
Well, keep talking.
okay, and slap and tickle, which is kind of like a English slang for sex, and coming out of chokey, and common as muck and things like that. So it's just very, very English in many ways. Am I back?
Yes.
Yes, you're back.
Yeah. Sorry, dodgy Wi-Fi. So that just feels like a very kind of English thing, and I'm amazed if that ever traveled to the US, or what most people in America thought of it, or anywhere else. Really, it feels like a very kind of English sentiment, really, coming out of East London and Essex. And the final thing I wanted was really, it's kind of in 3 parts in terms of a piece of vinyl. It's this record, the first album by the Cocteau Twins. But really, it's about this gentleman who is John Peel, and this CD, which is Cocteau Twins BBC sessions. So the reason I kind of picked that was that, as the story goes, the Cocteau Twins made a tape. They started in '79, I think. They made a tape. They made 2 copies of a tape with a couple of songs on, which ends up on Garland's. And they come down to London and they give 1 copy to Ivo Watts at 4AD Records, and they give 1 copy to John Peel. And scrawled inside the tape says, phone us on this number between 5 and 6 p.m. and went back to Scotland. And they didn't have a phone at home, so between 5 and 6 p.m. they would go and stand outside the phone box, the phone, the number they'd written down, because they were so sure that that either John Peel or Ivo Watts would call. And actually, Ivo called them and said, "Oh, do you fancy coming down to London and making a record?" And John Peel wrote to them and said, "Would you like to come and do a BBC session?" Some of which is on that CD. Sadly, it's never been put on vinyl. And so really, it's just the whole thing of the BBC, a kind of a totally non-commercial radio station with a DJ like that, working in the evenings, who could just literally play whatever he wanted. But apparently, when he first heard the Ramones, he loved it so much, he played 5 or 6 songs in one night in 1976, and he got quite a few complaints, which made him play them all the more, because he knew it's something, he must be doing something right. The more people complained, the more he loved it, really. And I wrote down a list of, I mean, some of the bands that he kind of championed and went on to have huge success. Pink Floyd apparently were just a kind of artsy band in London who a few people knew about, but he really championed them. David Bowie, Roxy Music, Led Zeppelin, the Ramones, the Specials, Nirvana, he certainly broke in the UK. The Sex Pistols, Joy Division, the Happy Mondays. There are so many bands that, because they used to do this thing where he would record 4 tracks, and that's partly to do with the whole unionization thing, that you used to have something called needle time on the BBC, which meant you could only play pre-recorded music for a certain amount of hours per day. But if you recorded them yourself, then they could play them. So they would rather play sessions by artists than play albums, in a way. So it set up this whole kind of thing where John Peel would get new and up and coming bands in, and just give them airplay if he kind of
what did the BBC
really all kinds of stuff.
After those artists recorded, like when they'd come in and do a session for the BBC, whether it's the Beatles or the Kinks or Bowie or whoever, were those recordings played subsequently over the years, months, years, or was that it? And they were put in a vault or locked away at the BBC? Do you know? Anybody know?
I think some of them went out live, probably not in the early days. I think they were all committed to tape and then played from time to time.
Okay.
And then, you know, in later years, they've kind of pulled them all out and put them into albums and stuff.
Yeah, I love that story, because the story that you probably know too, and I'm sure John knows, is the Billy Bragg story about John Peel wanting some kind of food and Billy Bragg showing up with the
biryani. He said I could
Mushroom
kill a
biryani,
biryani.
Yeah. There you go. Good old Billy.
Yeah, right.
Indeed.
Oh God.
But the thing, he was so important though, wasn't he? Because he was always wanting that the next band, the new sound, and he never, although he championed older bands and things, but but he was always moving forward, which is brilliant, because so many people, when they get to the sort of, sadly he died far too young, but they become stuck in the past, constantly wanting to relive the past successes in music. But he was always moving forward, even if it did mean having to listen to some happy hardcore on his radio show.
There's a lot of
he was far too obsessed with the Fall quite for my liking at the time, although I came to like them more later on.
Yeah. No, there's some nice shows on at the moment. I know his son Tom Ravenscroft is a DJ on Six Music, and to be fair to me, he doesn't normally reference his father, but at the moment he's doing a thing, I think, on a Sunday lunchtime where he's taking an artist which had performed at Peel Acres at John Peel's home back to the house, and just to go through his record collection. So, Damon Albarn out of Blur did it a few weeks ago, and so on and so forth, and just pulling out records from his collection and just talking about them. And it's been fascinating, really nice stuff, good stuff.
Yeah.
Well, now, this was fun. We're going to wind down now, and when I stop it, hang out here just for a couple of minutes afterwards. But want to thank you all. This is kind of exactly what I was hoping for. Not to, from my point of view, the British invasion was a moment, yet most of my favorite artists and my favorite place to go to this day is England, even despite the weather and the food for the most part, from an American's point of view. But I thank you all four of you for being here, and I'd love to build on this eventually, maybe do some other themes down the line. This could be like the Five Corners plus, and we can kind of add to it or something. But Headley, Ryan, John, David, thank you so much. I love it. I love it.
Yeah, it's been great.
Mazzy loves you. And can we all do it? No. I'm going to stop this now, but don't leave. And I do want to do a shout out to Rob Walker, because Rob Walker was going to be on this in this group of British people, and he got injured. And we all wish Rob a speedy recovery. Correct, lads?
Yes.
Oh, yes.
But perhaps we could try and guess what records Rob was going to pick.
Oh, that would be fun.
Yeah.
Without showing Oasis and the Smiths.
Yeah, I think he'd show the Smiths. I think he'd show New Order. Any band.
The Jam. Definitely the Jam.
The Jam.
Oh,
Yeah,
of course, the Jam. Of course.
Yeah.
Definitely not jazz.
Definitely not jazz.
No. But does he go with Style Council too, or does he stop after the Jam? I don't even know. I forgot.
No,
I think he goes anything that.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you all, and again, Rob, we miss you. Maybe next time when we do one of these. And again, thanks to everybody. Links below to all the channels of all the participants, and God save the Queen
and a fascist regime.
Yeah, I was waiting for that. Take care, everyone. See you next time.
Cheers.